Hi, and welcome to the third episode of the Reenactors Corner. I'm here again with Chris Pittman, and in this episode, we'll talk about what reenactors love to talk about, and that is gear.
Hey guys, welcome to number 3. Eager to talk about some gear-related stuff today. Lessa and I have run the Reenactor help pages in the past, and far and away the most common subject on the Facebook discussion pages has been uniform and equipment-related stuff. So I think it's only fitting that we kind of do a spotlight on some reenacting gear for an episode of this podcast.
I mean, gear is what reenactment is about.
Well, I think for a lot of people it is. And I mean, I can only look down my nose so much at it because the fact is that I myself am a sick hoarder when it comes to reenactment gear. I have way too much. And I certainly can't tell anybody else what to do in regards to not being focused on gear, because I do love it. I do have lots of it. And I wanted to talk, I guess maybe we could start off by just talking about some gear that we have that we love.
Yeah, gear that I love. The thing is, I don't really like a lot of the German gear. I find it to be horrible. Basically.
Yeah, but I mean, on some level, you like it. I mean, you bought it, and
it looks good when it's on you.
Yeah.
But I mean, if I was to know what I did know now, I would totally go be American. Because that gear is just like a canvas water bottle, a canvas belt, and you're done.
Well, I don't know. I've never actually worn American World War II gear. It seems weird to me, like the hooks that hook stuff onto the pistol belt. I don't really understand it. But
all right, imagine this. You are able to put on your gear by yourself, and when you put on your gear, the gear stays in place.
I mean, I put my gear on by myself, my German gear. I don't know, maybe you just need some more practice, Lassa.
I swear to God, you need an entire company of help to get on this stuff.
Generally speaking, I pride myself on getting it all on by myself. But I will admit, there are times if we get woken up with an alarm and you have to put all of the gear on right away and you've only got a few moments, maybe I will enlist some help in getting that hook from a gas mask canister strap onto the belt in the back there.
Yeah. That's the biggest issue, isn't it?
That's the number one most difficult thing, is that stupid little hook for this meaningless thing that you that doesn't do anything. This canister, the Gatorade canister or whatever.
Yeah, the Gatorade canister, that's what it's for. But gear I love, I mean, it isn't
struggling there.
Yeah, it isn't standard issue gear, but I would probably say the camera I got.
Oh, cool. What kind of camera do you use?
Too many to list in one episode. But
do you have a favorite one?
I have, that's too many to list in an episode. But
all
probably
right.
the camera I use the most is is a Kodak Retina Type 118. It's a very simple, collapsible, foldable 35mm camera. I can have a roll of 40 shots in the camera, and it fits even in the breast pocket of the tunic.
That's really cool.
And experience says that the camera you bring with you is the one that you'll use.
That's totally true. Yeah, as you know, I like to use box cameras to take reenactment photos. I like the results. that I get. I like the simplicity of the camera. I like not having to use a light meter. But yeah, there are places that you can't take a box camera. There's places where this bulky box simply cannot go.
Yeah, the worst thing is that the box cameras doesn't even fit in the Gatorade canister.
Well, I think I have a couple of little Zeiss Icon box Tangoras that would fit in there. But even if it does fit in there, it like, I don't know, it rattles around in there. And I actually keep a gas mask in my canister, so um,
You do what?
I know, right? I like having the gas mask in there. We have a lot of cabbage-based meals that we serve, so there's a use. Um, but I'm sure that people who have seen my Facebook posts know that I am a huge enthusiast of the Tornister, this maligned backpack that a lot of people don't like, that a lot of people have misconceptions about. I really like this pack. I use an a reproduction that I got more than 10 years ago from the now defunct World War I vendor Schipper Fabrique. This was the first, I think, reproduction tornister that was ever made. And it's not ideal for World War II reenacting because it's a World War I pattern. But that pattern was made up until the beginning of World War II for use by paramilitary groups and civil and political organizations in Germany. And I know that some German units were equipped on some level. Probably this wasn't the norm, but there was certainly issue of paramilitary and political type gear to Wehrmacht soldiers. And I think it stands to reason that a unit like mine that portrays a second line unit that had a very low priority in supply might have been issued gear that was supplemented with obsolete or paramilitary stocks. I mean, we see this in photos, not just with the tornister, but ammunition pouches and so on and so forth. So it works for me. But I like the tornister as a pack. I like that I can strap a lot of stuff to the outside of it. The pack itself isn't big, but you can carry a lot by strapping stuff onto it. And it carries everything that I want. Like a lot of people, I think, prefer a rucksack because the rucksack is maybe bigger. But I'm not trying to bring my entire kit to the event in the tornister. I'm wearing my uniform when I'm at the event, of course, and I've got my gear on my belt. But the tornister carries the things that I can't carry in my pockets or on my belt. So like my bedding goes in the tornister, certain personal items that I need or might want, like my sewing kit or an extra shirt or extra foot wraps, stuff like that. I know a lot of people have probably seen that there's a packing diagram from the 30s that's out there that supposedly shows what you're supposed to have in your tornister, but I'm really convinced that diagram just shows you what you're supposed to store inside your tornister when it's in your barracks locker.
Yeah,
And
because that
obviously,
diagram shows the low boots in it,
right,
amongst
which
other things.
you'd be wearing. That your mess kit is in there and stuff, and that obviously is worn on the belt. Look, the tornister. Most German soldiers in the field didn't have their tornister with them all the time. The tornister was with the Gepäck, the company Gepäcktross. But I've got a lot of anecdotal evidence and some documentary evidence for use of tornister in the field. I've got an account from an American soldier who fought in the Battle of the Bulge, who describes rummaging through the tornister of a German soldier that he killed. And he finds some Christmas cookies in there and eats them with his buddies. And of course, Christmas cookies are not on that packing diagram for the tornister either. But there's another anecdote of a Russian soldier who was trying to, many years, decades after the war, he was trying to track down a German soldier that he captured, and he had kept his tornister and had the name on the tornister and the unit marking. So he was using that to try to track the guy down. So tornisters definitely existed in the field in a variety of different settings in a variety of different ways. And I don't find it very hard to find ways that I can kind of justify having the tornister as a part of my isolated outpost, sort of an impression.
Yeah,
So,
and even if the tornisters or rucksacks were in the trust, they would still be available to the German soldiers.
right, maybe not like on any given moment, and I'm certainly not saying that it was ever normal for like soldiers to be charging into battle with these things on their backs, but I could go on and on with veteran accounts that talk about these things, and of course, veterans had different attitudes about this piece of gear as well. I remember I got to interview a guy who had been in a Nachrichten unit on the Eastern Front, and I said, "Did you have a tornister?" And he said, "Whoa!" And I said, "It's like a backpack covered with fur, an Affe." He was like, "Oh yeah, 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 we had that." I'm like, "Oh, what did you keep in that thing?" He said, "That thing? We didn't keep anything in that piece of shit."
Yeah, I remember reading a memoir about a tornister where the guy said that if there was one piece of kit he loved, it was the Affe.
I mean, there is a reason why this style of backpack was like the German sort of Boy Scout backpack for 100 years. It's a usable pack, and it's a pack that has tradition. I know that, or I read that I think even as early as the Franco-Prussian War, and maybe earlier than that, even the German military did have rucksacks for some specific troops in specific roles. And in World War One, there were rucksacks. But in the 30s, when they were building up the Wehrmacht, they stuck with the tornister because it was the classic traditional pack and because it worked. And, I think there's a misconception that the tornister was replaced with the rucksack later in World War II. And I don't think that was ever the case. I think the tornister remained the standard backpack of the German infantrymen until very, very close to the end. They started coming up with that Sturmgepäck 44, like the so-called, what people mislabel it, the artillery rucksack. But that's, I don't know. We'll save that for the rucksack episode of the podcast, I guess.
Certainly.
But
when you go back to the Franco-Prussian War, the Norwegian army actually used tornisters as well for a very long time, but I'm not sure about
they're awesome.
when.
The horse hide or the cowhide, whatever it is on there, they're just awesome. They're beautiful looking. I have one that I use for like trips and hiking and stuff, and people ask me about it all the time. I know they think it's some kind of fancy hipster accessory, which is fine. Go let them think that.
Yeah, I use a tornister for my reenactment impression. I don't actually use it too much because most events we do not use backpacks at all. But my unit co-commander, Nicholas, actually, he uses a rucksack, and after, I think he's had it for like a few years now, and he actually commented the same as you did, that the rucksack is basically, its only use is to store all of your kit at home and to the event. But as soon as you unpack your kit, it's basically too big for whatever event there is.
Yeah, like what would you put in there? I mean, if you've got all your kit on and then you've got this giant rucksack, I mean, I don't know, it's filled with blankets and stuff. I don't know. To me, the tornister is a more practical thing. And look, I just like it. I think it's cool. It's a lot more water resistant than a rucksack for the stuff that's inside. It's a nice pillow. It's everything that I want out of a backpack.
Well, I think it's the I think the pillow functionality is its best functionality.
I think that a pillow is the best thing that anything can be. But I have a sentimental attachment now to my tornister, and this is true also to like a lot of other kit items that I have that I've used for a long time. I remember when Sturm came out with the aluminum sporks. like the eating utensil folding nut fork and spoon thing. I got one of those, and I can't tell you how many meals I have eaten with the same fork and spoon.
Yeah,
And
same. Or the Göffel, as the Germans call it.
yeah, the Guffo. I would be so bummed if I lost to this thing. And at one of the most recent events I did, the Stalingrad event in Ohio, we were there for, I think we got there on, I can't remember if I got there, it must have been Thursday. Got there on Thursday. And we were living in like a basement of this ruined building for a few days. Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And the whole time we were like throwing our like food waste out of like a broken window in this basement. And it was like the washing water from cleaning out our mess kits and like leftover bits of stew and stuff. We were just throwing out this window. And I actually told one of my guys to do me a favor and dump out my mess kit out through that window. And it had my spoon and fork in the
Mm.
mess kit. And so I was like, oh no, I have to go and get it. So I go, and now I don't know what's on the other side of this window. And what was on the other side of this window that we had been dumping all of our wastewater on was like a big pile of rubble. And now it's a big pile of rubble that is covered with like cold grease and food scraps and waste. And I had to kind of sift through that. And it was so gross. But I was determined to find my spoon and fork because it's mine, and I could get another one for $6 or whatever. But I wanted mine, and I did find it, and I won't make that mistake again.
Sounds like a nightmare, to be honest.
It was super gross. I mean, it's like whatever kind of weird asbestos, gross, factory debris, covered with like we had made like a goat stew that had bones in it. So there's goat bones, bread crust soaked in cabbage grease. It was gross. But I love my spoon, and I don't know. It's weird, right? Because like I'm almost like, well, maybe I should just retire that one and get another one, which would be so absurd. The reality is the reason why I like that one is because it's the one that I've always used, and I use it because I like it. I don't know. It's weird how I interact with my World War II gear. Because it's like when I'm eating with a spoon, usually at home, when I'm eating a chicken pot pie or whatever I'm having for dinner, I'm not like thinking about that spoon. But at a reenactment, it's like I'm eating the meal. The meal is cool. I'm eating it out of my mess kit, which is cool. I've got the cool folding fork and spoon thing, and it's just like, I don't know. It's like a hyper reality, where you're totally into all of these mundane objects that in regular life, and probably the soldiers during World War II probably never gave this stuff a second thought. The spoon, what's a spoon? A spoon's a spoon. But not all of my gear I really love. There are certain aspects of my kit that I'm like not crazy about.
Oh, I got a long list of that.
What's your least favorite thing?
Low boots and gaiters.
Yeah, they're annoying for sure.
Yeah. And
I
then,
switched over to wearing jack boots, which are like comfy slippers by comparison.
oh yeah, I hear all these stories, but then there's the question of ankle support and also authenticity.
Authenticity is key. Ultimately, you kind of have to wear what your impression dictates that you wear. So that's why I wore low boots when I used to do like a late war grenadier impression, because that's what they had. So it wasn't even like a matter of a choice. But with what I do now, especially since I'm trying to move away from 1944 and I'm trying to be able to do 1942 and even 1941, I think the jack boots are more appropriate, and I will never take it for granted when I wake up in my Zeltbahn tent in the middle of the night and I need to take a piss, and I can just slip on those jack boots and I'm done. I will always cherish those moments.
There's so many nights where I woken up and just said, "Nope, keep it in." and
I have
just
seen, I have seen, I have seen people try to piss outside the tent without getting out of the tent. Uh,
oh,
we
you're
did an
looking at
event.
your
We did
lobus,
an
and it's
event.
like, no.
No, it's a nightmare. We did an event many years ago when I was a younger and far beer reenactor, and my unit had a big tan tent, and everyone was sleeping on cots. And it rained so hard, and the ground became saturated so fast that after like a solid day of rain, there was like a river flowing through the tent. And if you got out of your cot, you were standing in inches of water. Um, and I saw a guy just like lay on his cot and like piss through like a little gap between the
No.
frame of the cot and the canvas. It's just like it just got washed away in this rushing river inside the tent,
No.
so it didn't matter.
That's disgusting.
Ugh. Yeah, well, sometimes reenacting is gross. Sometimes men are gross. Sometimes I'm gross. Uh,
That's fantastic. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, I'm also not really a fan of Y straps.
yeah. I'm also not a fan of the Y straps at all. I haven't used mine in years.
Yeah, same. Well, no, I really don't ever use it, and you do see on lots of photos that it's not in use either.
Well, I mean, they were like the unit that I portray, that unit type never had Y straps. And there's a tremendous number of different types of World War II units that didn't get the Y straps. And there's a lot of reasons why individual soldiers might not have had Y straps. I mean, they don't show up in every sold book at all. You can see in sold book issue entries who got Y straps, and a lot of people didn't get them. And I think they're overused a little bit in reenacting it. I think in recent years that fact has kind of come to light, and people have been maybe made aware of that a little bit. That Y straps wasn't necessarily part of the very basic combat loadout of every guy. You know.
Yeah, because early war Y straps weren't even standard issue to units that you would consider would get them, like frontline combat units.
Right. They weren't widespread until later, and I mean, I'm not saying that people shouldn't wear them. Don't get me wrong. There are many types of impressions in which I think they're absolutely necessary, and certainly lots of combat photos show the Y straps. But like you say, lots of them don't. I think a lot of reenactors, and maybe me included in this, wear too much gear. If we look at original photos and also original manuals and doctrine, that kind of it definitely makes it clear that, like, in certain settings, having less equipment was not only like allowed but encouraged. Like night patrols, things like that. They were basically told in some manuals say things like keep ammunition in your pockets and don't bring your gear. For scout patrols, Speer stuff. So yeah, I think and another thing obviously is the A-frame is something that I think gets maybe overused. When I got started in reenacting, I bought an A-frame because I thought that was something that everybody had to have, and that was something that everybody got. But the reality is that most soldiers never had the A-frame, and the one that I had, I used it on maybe 2 occasions, and I guess I can see that it would be useful, like if you're going on an assault.
Yeah, which is what it was made for.
Exactly, and I can see that. But most reenactment settings are something other than you being in this like sustained assault, moving forward where you're maybe not being supplied or whatever. And of course, a lot of reenactors are portraying units that probably weren't even participating in infantry assaults. So, yeah, I definitely think that the A-frame is something that might get more use. Although, again, I think in recent years that's kind of been, people have been made aware of that. I feel like I don't see it. I don't see the A-frame at events that I go to as much as I used to a few years ago.
Yeah, when I started my unit, it was something we considered to put on the list because every other unit had it. But now in recent years, it doesn't seem to be that common at all anymore, which is good.
I agree with you. It is good, and I think that's kind of interesting, right? How like these kind of reenactorisms sort of become self-perpetuating until finally it takes some people or a group of people to be like, "Hey, wait a minute, why are we doing this?" And it's like something that I've written about recently, the tan Trinkwasser bottles that people reenactors that in that reenactments that I've been to for the last 20 years, it's kind of a standard thing to hold water in camp. You know, you got your Zaltbahn tent and you've got your Trinkwasser bottle that is filled with your drinking water. But the reality is that I really think these were tropical issue only items that were never general issue. And sure, they existed in World War II. There must have been a lot of them that were made, but I think the way reenactors use them is probably not right. Um,
Yeah,
but
because they're made of aluminium, and aluminium was basically meant solely for production of planes.
yeah, I think they were all Luftwaffe issue, and I don't have documentation to prove that, but you know, that's not an idea that I came up with. That's kind of a collector idea about these things.
Yeah, I see
Um,
that more and more recently, but I don't think there are only tropical issue because there's lots of them in Norway from the occupation.
that's interesting. Yeah, but who knows? Who knows? You know, it's like, um, you know, I would say the tropical pith helmet. There were warehouses of those that were found after the war, and they're very common now. But they weren't like widely used during the war. It's just that warehouses of them were found, and like there's that famous story. There was some late war gas mask canisters that were found inside a train in France, and they're those RLN 44 and 45 ones that you see everywhere. I mean, there were thousands of them that were found in France. So you know, I don't know. It's tough to say. I think sometimes there's definitely some unanswered questions to me about the Trinkwasser bottles, and I could be totally wrong.
I
But
don't. I
I
think
think
you are totally wrong on that. They were only for North Africa tropical issue because Norway is the opposite of that.
what if they were being stored in Norway for some other unknown potential future use rather than actually being used by soldiers there?
But I've seen them used in photos, usually
Mm,
at airfields. So I do
okay,
believe
that makes
they're a
sense.
Luftwaffe issue, but
But not tropical.
yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, you know, to me, not to like beat a dead horse with this, but to me, the things that you use in reenacting should be dictated by documentation. And if somebody was going to be doing a Luftwaffe airfield impression and they had seen that in a lot of pictures, those bottles were common, then that would be great. But like basically nobody who's got the thing outside a Zeltbahn tent in their camp is using it because they saw that that was common or typical in documentation. They're just using it probably because they saw other reenactors doing it, and it's just been a self-perpetuating thing that's gone on for years and years.
Yeah, same with the famous food container.
Well, the when I got started in reenacting, it was like encouraged for every soldier to have his own Essenträger container so that he could keep his beer cold in there because you put ice in there and you put your cans of beer in there and they stay cold for 2 days and you can have your cold beer. But of course, that's ultra hoke and not reenacting.
Yeah. There's also that many units have the Essenträger on display when it wasn't something a unit had. It was basically belonging to the field kitchen and
Yeah, it
was
was a field.
then,
It's like a field kitchen accessory. You know, it
yeah.
would be cool to see people who have field kitchens filling those up and runners dispatching them. Yeah, I've seen them used. I've been to some events where I went to an event that was in the trench, the World War I trench site in Newville, and we were in the foremost lines, and someone crawled up to us with the Essenstrager full of soup. It was really cool. So it definitely has a place, but certainly I think overused. And as far as using it as a cooler, I mean, that's just embarrassing. Like, what are you even doing?
Yeah. To cool things down, you could use the authentic method of actually just digging it down in the ground, which is a technique we often use to conserve meat at events.
That's
Fresh
cool.
meat, we wrap it up and we dig it down a feet or two under the ground, and it is cold. It's basically
I've
a
never done
fridge.
that. That's really neat.
That's what it did.
I
I've
have
also done it
been,
with my beer at public displays too.
there have been times when I have been able to keep my beer in like a lake. That was really cool. But yeah, usually when I bring meat to events, I bring either stuff that it doesn't have to stay cool. So like canned meat or something like a hard salami or something like that.
Yeah,
But
but
maybe I'll have to try that digging. It would be cool. A lot of the field kitchen recipes used fresh meat, and definitely soldiers had access to fresh meat. Um, Looking at memoirs, describing this stuff. So
yeah, and a good
definitely.
technique on keeping that cool is just digging it down, because even though it's sunny, extremely dry, very warm, 1 feet underground, you basically have like more or less fridge temperatures.
Wow, that sounds really neat. I actually didn't know that.
Well,
I
the more
mean,
you
maybe I'll
know.
try that this summer. Yeah, well, that's kind of part of what reenacting is like building these skills and learning this stuff. We had talked a little bit about gear that people use too much of, and I think there's kind of a corollary to that, like gear that people maybe don't use enough. And an example that I think about that is the entrenching tool, which it or the Schanzeug, which is this little shovel on your belt that I think people don't realize has a whole bunch of purposes even beyond anything having to do with digging. I remember I was at an event one time where we had to clear some brush away from a machine gun position, and the one of the machine gunners was out there in front, and he was trying to clear the brush away by like twisting these branches and breaking them with his hand. Um, and I said, "Hey, why don't you use your entrenching tool?" And he turned around with this look of surprise, and you could see it dawning on him, being like, this thing, this is a useful thing. This is a object that can be used for stuff. And I don't, I can understand in a sense how if you've gone to reenactments for years and never used this thing, you could almost forget that it's there. But it definitely is a thing that is good to have and has a purpose. In my group, we have kind of an unofficial rule, which is that if we go out on patrol, at least one person in the squad or the group, whatever, has to have an entrenching tool in case we encounter something out there where an entrenching tool is needed. But usually there's more than one person who chooses to bring it because, in addition to being able to chop down small brush and dig holes in fire pits, you can use it as kind of a windscreen with an Esbit stove. You could use it as a writing desk. I mean, there's a million different things that you can do with the entrenching tool.
Frying pan as well.
That is a goal of mine, and I've never done it.
You should.
I want to do it. I've seen some recipes. This is kind of outside of the whole World War II milieu, but there's a type of like old timey food called hoe cakes. This isn't, like I said, not World War II German, but where laborers who were working with shovels or hoes would bake these kind of little flatbreads over fire, make a crude sort of a bread by kind of frying it up on the shovel. And I want to try that with my
Oh,
entrenching tool at some future time, maybe
that's
outside of the
interesting.
context even. Yeah, something different.
Yeah, I've used mine as a frying pan. In my unit, we use the entrenching tools almost at every event.
That's really cool. Well, I'm really jealous of that. there's a few reasons why we don't use them as much in my unit, and the primary reason is because we just don't have permission to dig at a lot of the event sites we do, where it's somebody's property and they don't want there to be a bunch of fresh holes. That would be a problem for them. Um, but then, kind of the other thing is that the soil in the area where I live and where we do most of our reenactments is like this glacial deposit that is extremely rocky. Or we're doing the event in the woods, and the roots of the trees are so dense and thick that to try to actually dig anything really even big enough for one person with just the entrenching tool becomes very, very difficult.
Yeah, but as you said, it has more uses than digging.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely does.
I think.
Yeah, I get a lot of use out of mine.
Yeah, I think another piece of equipment that isn't used enough is a personal kit, as in hygiene products. And I think most of that reason is because most events are Friday to Sunday and you don't need hygiene products really. But we've encountered some longer events, and I remember one member who is a good reenactor. This is many years ago. He's become more aware of the issue, but we needed to clean ourselves with soap and water after several days because you might get infections by just spending basically 3 days out in the woods. But so I said, like, all right, let's go clean ourselves. Bring your soap. And he said, I don't have a soap. And I was kind of dumbstruck, like, why don't you have a soap? And he said, well, I've never had any use for one.
That's kind of funny, and I don't know. It reminds me of the classic reenactor movie Cross of Iron, where dirt combined with the body's natural oils can make you waterproof. No, I agree with you though about the hygiene stuff. Like, to me, this is one of the things that separates like a serious reenactor from a less serious reenactor. Like a razor. Everybody in my unit is required to have a period correct double-edged safety razor, and we do put an emphasis on shaving as a part of our morning routine. We'll heat up some water. We have a basin. Everybody shaves, and we start our day. And I know there are a lot of reenactors who have never shaved using period type shaving equipment and maybe never will. But to us, that's absolutely crucial for trying to live the life.
Yeah, same for us. And there's also, as said, you can get infections, which will basically put you out of the game for a few days by just being out in the woods and not cleaning yourself for 3 days. So in my unit, we require everybody to have a handkerchief or a towel or something, a small piece of cloth, to clean themselves with daily.
That's really cool. Yeah, we do a little bit of a wash-up thing. I think it's an important part of camp life. And even, like I say, like the wash basin. I mean, this was an issue thing in the military, in the German Wehrmacht. For barracks, every Stube had a basin for washing up. And when you look at photographs of Zeltlager, very often there's a basin visible somewhere.
Yeah, we got a couple, and we'll for longer events we'll always bring one.
Cool. Yeah, that's to me, these are some of the best kit items, are these things that are like so intertwined with what life was really like, what the day-to-day life experiences really were for these people. And yeah, I get a lot more use out of my unit's wash basin than I ever did out of my A-frame, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, maybe now that we've talked about the wash basin will be the new fad and everybody will have one. And you just walk into camp and it's like 15 wash basins, you know?
I certainly hope so. I remember back in the during the Normandy events, there was a guy who had a collapsible canvas basin that he basically could, well, collapse and fold it over so it had, like, it didn't use any space. He reenacted an officer, so it kind of makes sense that he had it. But I was so dumbstruck that something like that exists, because here I am lugging around all these huge basins.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I never saw such a thing.
No, and he used it every day, and I was like, damn, if there's one piece of kit I want, it's a collapsible basin.
That sounds really cool. You know that like there were people who valued the basin more than other people, right? And there definitely would have been people who maybe weren't just officers who like wrote home and was like, please, like, you know, I my old collapsible basin, please send it or something like that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. As in today, you got people who don't care about hygiene, and then you got people who may be overly obsessed about it.
That's one thing that I kind of think about sometimes where it's like, oh, geez, is there anything that I could add to my kit, right? You know, and I think, well, maybe I'll get a period correct watch, a pocket watch or a wristwatch. But the reality is, in my day-to-day life today, I don't wear a watch, and I never have. I'm like just not a watch guy. And I'm sure that, you know, there were people in World War II who didn't have a watch because they didn't have to have one and they didn't want to have one.
Yeah, I'm a big watch guy. I like my watch.
Yeah, well, that's one of those things. It's like it's kind of a way to express your individual taste a little bit. There are some people who will turn their noses up at a unit that, for example, requires all of its members to wear the same model of uniform and say, oh, those guys are cookie cutter, you know. This is a parade ground thing. They all look exactly the same. But the reality is that you're never going to have a whole group that looks exactly the same. You're always going to have variations in equipment. You're always going to have people having or not having, you know, personal items of various kinds based on their personal tastes and their personalities. So I think it's kind of interesting. You don't need to have some kind of outlandish snowflake getup uniform that no one has ever seen before to put your own personal touch on an approach to gear. You know, it can be done in other more subtle ways that are maybe more meaningful.
Yeah, and when you're talking about that, I just remembered maybe the most overused piece of gear that's really not too realistic either, and that is the classic walking out uniform.
Well, that's one of these perennial reenactor confusing, like, you know, I have been involved in this in my life. Other people in other units I've been in putting together this quote unquote walking out thing. And no, I agree. It's the actual number of times when that's really appropriate. Like, I've actually never gone to an event at which I was portraying, for example, a soldier on leave in a German, you know?
Yeah, same.
Like, what the heck kind of event is that? I mean, I would love to do that. That event is never going to happen. You can't, that's not, there is no German city from the 40s in which we could do a reenactment, you know, full of civilians.
Yeah, I would love to do it myself, but yeah. And there's also that, there's this old reenactorism that is that the walking out kit was always a nicer uniform, so they always pick the M36 because it's a nicer uniform. But in reality, the M36 and the M40 and the M42 and the M43 tunics were basically called Feldblusen, and all these changes are basically like not specified changes per name.
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons why people are confused about this, and I think part of the reason is because because the reality is that there kind of wasn't really like this kind of a complicated subject, because part of the reason why this is complicated is because what we call a walking out uniform had maybe some like different meanings in German. It's not exactly like a one-to-one concept here, but generally speaking, the dress uniform was something that ceased to be really a thing starting around 1939. The outbreak of the war, it was like the time for the dress uniforms is over. It will come back in peacetime. The dress uniform concept was kind of a peacetime concept. And so, but guys are looking at pictures of these soldiers in walking out kits, and they are all wearing earlier model uniforms and gear because they are pictures from the 1930s. And they mistakenly, I think, maybe even subconsciously think, okay, well, this was what a nice uniform was during the war, was this like 1930s look, but that's not how it was.
Yeah, because in reality, that is basically his issue uniform that he uses day to day. It just came clean for the occasion. Or it wouldn't even be clean for the occasion because they were supposed to be clean all the time.
Exactly. It's really interesting if you get away to some extent from the propaganda photos and look at like studio photos that were taken during the war years, a lot of which I think were taken of soldiers when they completed their training or when they were home on leave. And you see these guys wearing the M42, M43 field blouse. Maybe they've got some fancier insignia on there, or very likely they don't. But it's clean and they look sharp and neat. And this is this guy looking his best, and this is what a lot of reenactors, I think, would look at and be like, oh, well, he's wearing his combat uniform. He's like ready to go into battle. It's like, this was his service uniform that he wore every day. He wore this. If he had gotten married, he would have worn that.
Yeah. Like only the top brass had like specific dress uniforms.
They actually, at some point, and I don't have the information here. They actually they forbid further manufacture of dress uniforms by like anybody, even the top brass, because of wartime shortages and clothing rationing. The raw material shortages.
Well, it makes sense.
And that extended even to the Nazi Party political leadership. They couldn't get nice uniforms, after a certain time. This whole practice came to an end.
Yeah, it probably happened after Germany went into total war in late 43, I imagine.
Things started to change, I think, a lot in that way after even as early as the beginning of 1943, stuff like that. When they needed to replace the tremendous losses at Stalingrad and elsewhere on the Eastern Front, and they just had to clothe and equip so many men in a situation where they had already been. I have a document here somewhere that pertains to the SS, and it's from 1939, and they're talking about where are we going to get the raw materials? We don't have enough fabric. We don't have enough clothing. We can't get enough clothing, and this was like when they were at their best, you know what I mean? And it only got worse from there.
Yeah.
So by 1942, it was an acute problem. 1943, 44, guys didn't have this whole like 1944 dress uniform concept where you've got a visor cap and an M36 tunic. It's not historical. It's like a weird reenactorism that just gets perpetuated. We talked a little bit earlier about like fads, and I think it's really funny to see how there's trends in the reenactment community with regard to gear acquisition. Like the best example of this was a few years ago on the old Help Page 2.0, when some people started posting original photographs showing Italian mess kits, and then suddenly everybody had an Italian mess kit. And then like a couple of months go by, and then the buy sell trade page on Facebook becomes filled with people selling their Italian mess kits because everybody has them. And it's like, it's just the rise and fall of the Italian mess kit trend was a real highlight in my social media reenacting career, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a couple of those fads that started on the help page and then suddenly disappeared again.
Even before the help page, like in my old reenactment, I don't know, there was someone in my group who, instead of wearing his canteen with the canteen cup, he just looped the the strap for the canteen around the neck of the canteen bottle itself and buckled it and didn't wear the cup. And I saw that and I thought, oh, that's kind of neat. I'm going to do that too. So I started doing it. And then, long story short, I'm at an event and I look down the row at the squad and it's like there's 8 guys who are doing this weird thing with the strap with no cup, and 2 guys have the cup, and it's like, what have we become? It's gone too far.
Yeah, there's actually been a few, I can't really remember any specific ones, but there's been a few times where someone in my unit has started something and I need to, like, few months down the road, I need to, like, say, like, hey guys, we need to stop this. It's
Yeah, you have to make conscious. That's part of what a reenactment group has to do, is you have to make some rules about kit that kind of have to be in some ways responsive to like what kit becomes available, right? I think back to my early days of reenacting, shortly after the year 2000, and this was at a time before everything was reproduced, and even the reproductions that did exist were limited in availability. So, like, for example, an M43 tunic, there were only 2 suppliers really in the United States that you could buy an M43 tunic from, and either or both of those suppliers could be out of stock at any given time. So, like, my old unit, you had to wear an M43 tunic, but, and this had to do with how the unit was formed, you had to get an M43 tunic, but if the M43 tunic was not available when you wanted to order your tunic and an M42 was available, you could get the M42. So because of this issue of availability and a lack of options, I actually think that there was some realism there that we've kind of lost now, where it's like stuff that was rare in World War II was rare in 2000, and it was rare to see that at a reenactment in 2000. Whereas now, stuff that was rare in World War II could be mass reproduced and available to anybody who has the money to buy it, and maybe you see too much of it at the reenactment. It's almost like we have too many choices.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Part of me liked it when it was like, I needed a canteen, and I didn't get to choose whether I got an aluminum or a steel one, and I didn't get to choose whether I had a black or a green cup or a Bakelite cup. It was like, this was the canteen that was available, and this is what I got.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I like too. When I usually, when people order stuff, I usually throw myself onto that order, and I say I want let's say an MP40 ammunition pouch pair. And he asks, do you want brown leather? Do you want black leather? And I'm like, I don't care. Buy something.
That's cool. Yeah, you get what you get.
Yeah.
That's good.
Like, I don't want to take those choices if I have the choice to not take the choice.
I agree. It's like, this is something you and I have talked about many times before, where it's like, which one is the best? And that in some cases, sure, maybe there's one reproduction that's head and shoulders above all others, but that in most of the cases, like what we're talking about with canteens, right? Like, I could put a row of all original canteens together, and they're all totally different from each other. All totally original, all totally different, and say, which one of these canteens is the best canteen for, let's say I was making a mannequin of a German infantryman in 1944. And the reality is there is no best, because they're all original canteens, even though they're all different, and they're all equally correct. And that's how it is with like a lot of I think reenactment kit. What's the best? And it's like, if this, I could probably find an original that looks exactly like this thing, and I could find another original that looks totally different. So it's not like, it's not like there was just one thing. There's a range of things, a variety of things from which you can choose, which can be a good thing and a bad thing.
Yeah, and that reminds me kind of the typical late war, or the fad about late war being you wore what you had, which some people seem to interpret that every recruit went into a supermarket with all available equipment and just got to pick whatever they thought looked coolest.
There's a lot, and that's absurd. There's a lot, I think, of kind of misunderstandings, mischaracterizations of what late 1944 and 1945 was like. I see guys on the internet who want to do a 1945 impression, so they're searching out, the very latest models of field gear with rivets and the crappiest stuff. And it's like, the reality is that a 1939 dated canteen is like equally correct. In fact, probably arguably more common and typical in 1945 than a canteen made in 1940.
Yeah, I agree. And there's also when you got a group of 10 guys and they're all wearing different kind of camouflage items and different kinds of, well, everything. Because
it's so cringy.
Yeah, and they say, well, it's late war. They wore what they had. But the thing is, a unit was still supplied by a supplier that had a certain stuff, like a certain set of stuff.
Yeah, they didn't totally abandon the depot system. They didn't just take all of the gear that they had been, zealously, like carefully making and stockpiling for the previous 6 years and just throw it all into a blender and you get what you get. Yeah. The late war excuse for like having any and all types of gear is like right up there with the classic, if they had it, they would have used it,
Yeah. M16 automatic rifles at events.
If they had it, they would have used it. I saw a guy one time I've seen a lot of crazy things in my time. I saw a guy try to disguise an AK-47 to look like a Sturmgewehr. There was a guy who came to an local event a few years ago who had like some kind of Egyptian semi-automatic rifle called a Hakim that he was pretending it was a G43.
I'm glad we don't have that issue.
Well, not yet. I hope that you're. I hope that you don't get it, but yeah. I guess the last thing that I wanted. I know we're probably coming up on the end of the episode, but I just did want to touch on. I think what to me is the most important thing at all when it comes to gear, which is actually using it instead of just having these things as static visual props. Like the example I said with the guy with the shovel, not even thinking to use it as a tool. The ultimate goal has to be not just having these things and not even just wearing them in the field, but actually using them the way that the soldiers used them back then. That to me is the important part.
Yeah. Early in my career, I suffered from the very common issue of carrying everything you got. But as of recently, I'm actually, like people say, you have to stuff your pockets and stuff, but I don't even do that because I only choose items that I know I actually use. And I've thrown out so many personal effects from my impression because it never gets used. It's like one of those, like lots of those common or like luxury items that's like, you're never going to use it. Never. Like maybe once.
I totally agree with you. I've done the same. I feel like I went through a weird cycle of reenacting where at first I didn't have anything in my pockets, and then I realized it was important that I stuff my pockets full of every kind of thing, and I had like a whole apothecary full of every kind of doodad and nifty thing. And then eventually I went back to not having anything in my pockets because, I don't need it. How long are you really going to be carrying around this thing? That's the other thing. The stuff that I use, it pretty much all fits in my bread bag. I might have a pocket watch in my pocket. Really, not that much, or it's like literal trash. Like maybe some rifle cleaning wadding that I tucked into a pocket while I was putting my things away or something like that.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I don't have this like. And I actually was really bad with this. I mean, it's very embarrassing. I used to actually have like next to where I slept for a while, I had like a sort of like a end table that was made out of a wooden crate. And on top of this end table, I had like this whole array of like personal kit items that I thought was so cool. But like really, I think it just looked like a shelf at a supermarket. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was like they never, it was so. At some point, I just realized, like, what am I doing? This never would have been like this.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that it wouldn't be like this. I'm just like, I want to get out a can opener and I have to empty like 5 pockets, and basically I can open up a department store where I am after I've fished
Sure.
out the can opener. And it's
Well,
like, yeah,
I lived a life where I had like multiple can openers. Like way too much. Way too much.
like several can openers on your person at one time.
Oh yeah, I had like a knife with a can opener on it, like a folding knife with a can opener, and then I had a wood-handled can opener, and then I had one of the like small like German version of the P-51 type can opener. I in like different pockets. I could be opening. I had more can openers than I had hands. You know?
Well,
Yeah, it's
it's probably a
embarrassing.
good
I
idea
mean,
if you lose one or two, maybe four.
well, that was the thought, because part of it is also like, oh yeah, well, what if I lose that and then I have it, bring it all. Um, I think it actually helped when I finally got to the point where I had more stuff than I could ever possibly bring to an event, and then it forced me to choose which items I would bring, and that was a good thing, I guess. One of that maybe is the only good thing about having so much gear.
Yeah, you start packing lights. There's one more thing I want to touch on, which is kind of a reenactorism and kind of a gear that is not used enough, and that is gas masks. Because you have
Sure.
the age-old reenactorism that, the Germans just threw their gas mask and kept other stuff in their gas mask canisters.
Well, this is a kind of a bitter bone of contention with people, and I carry a gas mask, and I encourage members of my unit to have a gas mask in the canister, but I do not require it. And the reason why I don't require it is because for all of the information I have that kind of suggests that they had to have the mask in the can, there's some other information that says that they didn't have them. I by carrying the mask, I think it's clear where I stand. But I think anybody who says that every German soldier carried his mask all the time in the can is wrong, and anyone who says that every German soldier threw his mask away is also wrong.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that. But if you look at it from a more greater perspective, gas masks are made of rubber. They went from rubberized canvas to actually a full rubber mask. And rubber is something Germany doesn't have a raw material source for. It has to be imported, and it is very vital in all kinds of war machines. They even started experimenting in production with removing the rubber tire rim from tanks to save rubber. They had this massive shortage of tires in general for all vehicles, but they still kept producing so damn many gas masks, both for military and for civilians as well, because the threat of gas warfare was still very present. Even the Americans and the British carried gas masks at limited times at the war. It was regulation to always have a gas mask nearby, and it's just that they surrendered so many items for weapons and weapon systems to make gas masks. This was a very important thing. It was very expensive for Germany to make as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think, what you're talking about, which is almost like a social history of the gas mask, is like a cool story. And, the gas mask is a part of the World War II story. And I think it's important enough to warrant carrying the gas mask, even if some German soldiers didn't carry it, and even if it was never really used. I think they're underappreciated for like what you're talking about. What it symbolized, the potential of gas warfare that they were so frightened by. definitely.
Yeah, and I mean, the Allies and Germany stored massive quantities of gas to use in war in case the other part would use gas. So it was always a very present danger, and everybody knew of that. So gas masks were produced, even if that meant no tires for trucks.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, if they had to be vigilant on that stuff. I mean, and if you look at even the M44 version of the civilian gas mask, there's like a lot that went into the manufacture of those things, and that they were still making those and getting those out there as late as they did. It's obvious that it was important to them.
Yeah, and therefore, we as your unit, we do not require you to carry a gas mask, but at times we will actually do a gas drill, and whoever doesn't have a gas mask then is told you're dead.
That's really cool. That's neat. That's a really cool idea. Yeah, there's a bit of a problem with the gas mask, right? In terms of like availability, like it's too expensive to reproduce it. And originals are becoming, in America anyway, originals are becoming more expensive and harder to find. I was shocked recently when a guy in my group was looking to buy one, and he was asking me if he should spend, I think, $75 just for the mask. And I was like, that seems like so much. And he was like, find me a cheaper one, and I couldn't. And I carry the post-war version, which is very similar to the GM 38 or whatever.
Yeah, that's the one we recommend people to get as well.
But those have also like kind of become hard to find, and you're lucky to be able to get one.
This is true. Maybe one day someone will start reproducing them.
I would love to see that, but I feel like we're probably a far ways away from there because of how much it would cost just in tooling to make that stuff. I feel like it would be a lot of money.
Not to mention rubber, which was Germany's issue.
Sure. But just to make even just the stampings and stuff, I can't imagine how much they'd have to sell it for in order to make a profit, or how many they'd have to make. I'm just going to throw out there a bit of a plug here for the company Luftwaffe Supplies. They are trying to make a reproduction of the Luftwaffe issue rucksack, which is something that, as far as I'm aware, has never been reproduced before. And the guy who runs Luftwaffe Supplies is doing it in an interesting way, where he's doing it via pre-order. So he needs to get 100 people to order these rucksacks, and then once he gets the money from the 100 people, he will start production. And he's got a deadline that's coming up pretty soon that he's got to get the 100 sold by, or he's just going to refund everybody's money and not start producing these. And looking at how many he's sold so far, I have some pretty significant doubts that he's going to be able to meet his target. So if you happen to be listening to this in the near future, and you maybe are interested in having a really cool Luftwaffe rucksack, then I would ask you to go and place an order and help make this thing a reality, because I would love to have one of those. Not even for reenacting, actually, but just for trips where my tornister isn't adequate to the bigger task.
Oh yeah, I've seen pictures of the pre-production model. It looks pretty sweet. Now we could probably throw a link in the show notes.
Okay, yeah, I would like to do that. All right, so that, I think, wraps up our time on this gear episode.
Yeah, I think it does. So thank you for listening. And as always, we would appreciate you trying to spread the podcast to other friends who you think will appreciate it. And please leave a review, rate us at wherever you're listening to this, so we can, keep on going, keep on growing.
Yeah. I guess till next time, I'll see you in the field.
I'll see you in the field.
Bye.
Goodbye.